You see that jar of grease sitting by the stove. You think it's trash. You're about to pour it down the drain and throw the container in the bin. Stop. That jar is money. That jar is a lamp, a lubricant, a soap, and 3 hot meals you haven't cooked yet. And the 30 things I'm about to show you will do more for your wallet than any coupon, any app, any raise you're praying for. I know that because I lived it. I learned every one of these from people who survived on nothing back when going without wasn't a lifestyle, it was Tuesday. And most of it got buried, not because it stopped working, but because nobody makes a dime when you stop buying. Stay with me to the end, because the last trick comes straight out of a 1943 government pamphlet that told American housewives how to feed a family when the shelves were empty. It still works today. It costs you nothing, and you already own everything you need to do it right now, even if your account is sitting near zero. I remember the winter I had $11 to last 9 days. I was 26, sitting in a cold kitchen in a rented duplex, staring at a heating bill I couldn't pay. My grandmother's sister, a woman we all called Aunt Vi, sat across from me. She didn't lecture me. She just started opening my cabinets and showing me what I was throwing away. By the time she left, I understood something that changed the rest of my life. Being broke isn't about how little you have. It's about how much you waste without knowing it. So let me start where she started, with that grease jar. Every time you fry bacon, cook sausage, or brown beef, you pour off fat and throw it out. Aunt Vi kept an old coffee can by the burner. She poured the drippings in, let them cool, and kept them covered. That fat cooked her eggs the next morning. It seasoned her greens. It fried her potatoes so they tasted like a restaurant. 1 pound of bacon gave her nearly a cup of cooking fat, and that fat replaced the oil she'd otherwise buy. Over a year, that's real money, and its flavor you're currently dumping down a pipe. But here's the part almost nobody remembers. In the 1940s, saving that fat wasn't just thrift. Households were asked to save kitchen fats and turn them in, because the glycerin in them was used to make everything from soap to medicine. 2 pounds of fat, they were told, contained enough glycerin to matter. Ordinary people learned their kitchen scraps had value the modern world forgot. And once you see fat as a resource instead of garbage, you start seeing your whole house differently. Because the grease is just the beginning. Take the water you're pouring down the sink right now. When you boil potatoes, pasta, or vegetables, you dump that cloudy water without a thought. Aunt Vi caught it in a bowl. Potato water is full of starch, and she used it to thicken soups and stews so she didn't need to buy flour or cornstarch. Vegetable water went into the next day's broth. Even the water from boiling eggs, full of minerals, went out to her plants once it cooled. She used to say the poor pay twice, once for the food and once to throw half of it away. She refused to pay the second time. And that idea, refusing to pay twice, runs through everything I'm about to give you. Let's talk about bread, because I watch people throw out more bread than anything else. The moment it goes a little stale, into the trash it goes. But stale bread isn't spoiled bread. Aunt Vi kept a paper bag of dry heels and end slices. When it filled up, she made bread pudding, or she tore it into a stuffing, or she toasted it hard, crushed it, and made her own breadcrumbs that cost her nothing while the store sold them for real money. A loaf never died in her house. It just became something else, and if the bread had already gone too far, if it was drying into a rock, she didn't panic either. She'd wrap it in a damp towel and warm it low in the oven, and it came back soft enough to eat. That trick alone saved her dollars every single week, and it works in your kitchen tonight, but food is only one room in the house. Let me take you to the bathroom, because that's where your money vanishes fastest without you noticing. Look at your toothpaste tube when you think it's empty. You toss it. Aunt Vi cut hers open with scissors, and there was almost a week of brushing left scraped along the inside walls. She did the same with lotion bottles, with the last of the shampoo, with anything in a tube or a bottle. She said the last 10% is the part they count on you wasting, and she was right. Cut the tube, split the bottle, prop it upside down. You already bought that. Use all of it. And that bar of soap that's worn down to a thin, useless sliver, the one you'd throw away and open a fresh bar. Don't. She saved every sliver in a jar. When she had a handful, she pressed them together while wet, or tuck them into the toe of an old stocking to make a scrubbing pouch, or shave them into hot water to make liquid soap for dishes. Nothing left the house until it was truly gone. Here's the thing that started to hit me as I watched her. None of this was hard. None of it took money. It took attention. And attention is the one thing a whole spending culture has trained right out of us, because a person who pays attention buys less. That's when I started to understand that my emptiness wasn't all my fault. I'd been taught to waste. I just hadn't been taught the alternative. So let me keep handing you the alternative. Your vinegar. That cheap jug of white vinegar, a couple of dollars, is quietly the most powerful thing in your house. Aunt Vi cleaned her windows with it, half water and half vinegar, and they shone with no streaks and no expensive spray. She poured it in the rinse where you'd put fabric softener, and it softened the clothes and killed the smell without the perfume you pay a premium for. She ran it through her coffee maker to clean out the buildup. She soaked a rag in it and wrapped it around a crusted faucet to dissolve the hard water stains overnight. One jug replaced a whole shelf of cleaners, each of which is mostly water and marketing anyway. And baking soda, that little yellow box, is its partner. She scrubbed pots with it. She poured a spoonful down a slow drain, then the vinegar behind it, and the foaming lifted the clog for pennies instead of a plumber. She kept an open box in the icebox to kill odors. Then when it wore out, she dumped that same box down the drain to freshen it. One box, 2 full jobs, then gone. Nothing wasted, ever. But now I need to tell you why all of this disappeared, because this is where I got angry, and you should too. None of these methods vanished because they stopped working. They vanished because somebody figured out there was more profit in selling you 30 different bottles than in letting you clean your whole home with 2. Sometime after the 1950s, as the country got richer and television got into every living room, we were slowly taught that the thrifty way was the poor way, the embarrassing way, the old way. Convenience became a product. Disposable became a virtue. And the knowledge that carried families through the Depression got laughed out of the modern kitchen. The people who lived through hard times knew better. They just stopped being listened to. And when they passed, most of what they knew went into the ground with them. That's the real reason you were never taught this. Not because it failed you, because it threatened to sail. So let me keep pulling it back out of the ground, one trick at a time. Your clothes. When a button pops off, how many people throw the shirt in a donation pile or the trash? Aunt Vi kept a tin, an old candy tin, full of buttons, cut off dead clothing, and spare thread, and a couple of needles. A popped button was a 2-minute fix, not a reason to buy a new shirt. When a seam split, she sewed it. When a knee wore through on work pants, she patched it from the inside with fabric cut out of a shirt too far gone to wear. Those pants lived years longer. And a simple needle and thread, something almost every one of you already has in a drawer, is one of the highest paying tools you own. Socks with a thin heel, before they blow into a hole, she'd darn weaving thread across the weak spot. I know darning sounds like a lost art, and it nearly is, but the principle underneath it is what matters. You catch the small failure before it becomes the big one. You mend at the first sign, not after it's ruined. That one habit, applied to clothes, to shoes, to the house itself, to the car, saves more money over a lifetime than almost anything else I can teach you. But I promised you this works even if you have nothing to spend today, and I mean nothing. So let me speak straight to you if you're sitting there thinking these tricks still need a little money you don't have. This next stretch is built for you, for the person whose account is empty right now, this week, before any check comes. Every single thing here uses only what is already inside your walls. Start with light and heat, because those bills frighten people the most. That grease jar I told you about at the very start. In the old days, before anybody could afford lamp oil freely, people made a simple lamp from fat. You take a small jar, put in some of that saved grease or cooking oil, lay a twist of cotton, a bit of string or a strip of an old cotton rag, over the edge so one end sits in the fat and one end pokes out, and you light the tip. It burns slow and steady. It won't light a whole room, but in a blackout, when the power's cut and you have no batteries, that little fat lamp is the difference between sitting in the dark and being able to see. Poor households burned fat for light for thousands of years. It costs you nothing but a jar and a rag you already have. Now heat. When money's gone and the house is cold, you don't heat the house, You heat the person. Aunt Vi taught me to close every door in the home and live in one room, the smallest one with the most sun during the day. You seal the gap under the door with a rolled towel, what she called a draft snake, because most of your warmth crawls out under the doors and around the windows. She hung a heavy blanket over the window at night and pulled it back when the sun came, letting the free heat in by day and trapping it by night. On the coldest nights, she heated a single pot of water, poured it into a sealed bottle, wrapped it in a towel, and put it in the bed by her feet. That warmth lasted hours. It's an old, old trick, and it costs the price of boiling one pot. And here's one that sounds too simple to matter. A single lit candle inside a clay flower pot turned upside down, raised a little so air can move, will warm the space around your hands and take the bite out of a small room. It is not magic, and it will not heat a mansion, but when you're truly out of money and truly cold, you use what physics gives you for free. Poor people have always known that a little warmth aimed at the body beats a lot of warmth wasted on the ceiling. Now let me feed you when the cupboard looks bare, because this is the fear that keeps people up at night. Beans and rice kept whole generations alive, and there's a reason. Bought dry, in bulk, a pound of dried beans costs a fraction of the canned kind and makes far more. Aunt Vi soaked them overnight in water, which cut the cooking time and the fuel, then simmered a big pot low and slow with whatever scrap she had, an onion end that saved bacon fat, a bay leaf. One pot fed her for days. Dried beans and rice, stored dry in a sealed jar, keep for years and give you protein and energy for pennies a serving. If you have $5 to your name in a store nearby, that $5 in dry beans and rice buys you more days of survival than anything else on the shelf. And every scrap of vegetable you'd throw out, the onion skins, the carrot tops, the celery ends, the stems, she kept in a bag in the freezer. When the bag was full, she boiled it all down into broth, strained it, and there was the base for soup she'd otherwise pay for. The garbage made the gravy. That's not a saying, that's a Tuesday in her kitchen. Here's one that stunned me the first time I saw it. She would take the bottom of a head of celery, the root end you cut off and toss, and set it in a shallow dish of water on the windowsill. In a week, new green shoots grew up out of the center. Green onions did the same, the white root ends standing in a glass of water, growing back again and again. Lettuce, the same. She regrew food from the parts I was throwing in the trash. It won't feed an army, but a person with no money and a sunny window can grow free green food from garbage, over and over, and that is a kind of security no store can sell you. So now you've seen it. Light, heat, and food, all from what's already in your house, with no money changing hands. That's the floor nobody can drop you below once you know it. But knowing the floor exists brings up a harder question, and it's the one that separates people who merely survive from people who never fall that far again. The question is this: why are we always caught with nothing in the first place? Because we were taught to spend every dollar the moment it arrived, and to trust that more would always come, and to keep nothing back. That pattern, spend everything, save nothing, trust the system, is exactly what the old folks fought against their whole lives. And if you want to go deeper into how they built their thinking around scarcity, I put together a series of books called Poor Man Smart, Poor Man Mastery, and Poor Man System that lay out this entire way of living in one place. You'll find them linked in the description below. The old folks kept a little of everything, always, because they had learned in the hardest school that the lean time always comes back around. The old folks lived the opposite way. They kept a little of everything, always, because they had learned in the hardest school that the lean time always comes back around. Let me show you how they kept that reserve, because this is where you stop just surviving and start getting ahead. Aunt Vi kept what she called her deep pantry. It wasn't fancy. Every time beans or rice or salt or flour went on sale, she bought one or two extra and set them back, unopened, on a shelf in the cool of the basement. She rotated them, oldest in front. Over a year, she built up weeks of food without ever spending money she didn't have, just $1 or $2 of ordinary shopping redirected into the future. When money got tight, and it always did, she ate from that shelf instead of borrowing or going hungry. That pantry was her bank, and it paid better than any bank ever paid her. She did the same with money itself, in a way that sounds almost too plain to work. She kept coins. Every night she emptied her pockets and her purse of loose change into a heavy jar. She never touched it, never counted it, just fed it. Twice a year she rolled it, and there was always more than she expected. 40, 60, sometimes $100 grown out of coins she'd never have missed. She used to tap that jar and say the money you don't feel leaving is the money you get to keep. In a world that wants every cent the second you earn it, hiding money from yourself is a quiet act of rebellion. But saving means nothing if the things you own keep dying and forcing you to buy again. So the old people were fierce about making things last, and this is where their knowledge really humbles the modern world. Take your razor, if you use one. The blade doesn't go dull nearly as fast as you think. Most of what feels like dullness is the fine edge bending and the tiny bit of rust and residue after a wet shave. Aunt Vi's husband dried his razor after every use and, when it started to pull, ran it backward along the inside of his forearm or an old strip of denim, stropping it the way barbers strop a straight razor. That realigns the edge, and a blade that would have lasted a week lasts a month or more. You already own the razor. You're just replacing it too soon. Your batteries, the regular ones, don't always die when your device says they're dead. A remote or a small gadget stops working while the battery still has charge left, just not quite enough for that device. Aunt Vi kept those weak batteries and used them in things that need less. A wall clock, a small flashlight, a remote. She squeezed the last of the life out of every one. And I learned to keep batteries out of the heat and the damp, because a cool, dry drawer makes them hold their charge far longer in storage than a hot garage ever will. Your candles burn slower and last longer if you do one strange thing first. Put a new candle in the freezer for a few hours before you light it. The cold hardens the wax, and hardened wax melts slower, so the candle burns longer for the same flame. In a house that leans on candles when the power's out, stretching each one matters. It's a tiny trick, but the old thrift was built out of 1,000 tiny tricks stacked together until they added up to survival. And here's one for your clothes that saves both money and the machine. Aunt Vi almost never used a dryer, because the dryer is one of the hungriest machines in the house for electricity, and the heat wears your clothes out faster. That lint you clean out is literally your clothing breaking down. She hung a line, and in winter she hung clothes on a rack near that one warm room. Air-dried clothes last longer, smell cleaner, and cost nothing to dry. Over a year, a family that stops feeding the dryer keeps a noticeable pile of money that used to go straight up the utility pole. Now, I want to slow down here, because we're getting close to the thing I promised you at the start, and I don't want you to miss the weight of it. Everything I've shown you tonight, the fat, the broth, the mended seam, the deep pantry, the coin jar, all of it comes from a way of living that was normal for almost everyone until about 2 generations ago. It wasn't seen as clever or extreme. It was just how careful people lived. And it was deliberately made to feel shameful, made to feel backward, so that a growing industry of convenience could sell us the solution to problems we never actually had. You were not born wasteful. You were carefully, patiently taught to be, because your waste is somebody else's revenue. The people who refused to forget were the poor, the rural, the old, the ones who'd been burned too badly to trust that the good times would last. They kept the knowledge alive in kitchens and workshops and handwritten recipe cards, passing it down quietly while the rest of the world laughed. And now I'm handing it to you, which means you're one of the ones who gets to keep it alive too. So let me give you the last one, the one I told you about at the very beginning. In 1943, in the middle of the war, when meat and butter and sugar and canned goods were all rationed and the shelves were thin, the government put out guidance for the American housewife on how to feed her family through scarcity. Out of that era came a way of cooking that used a fraction of the fuel and stretched the cheapest, toughest food into something rich, and almost nobody does it anymore. It's called the hay box, or the fireless cooker, and when Aunt Vi showed it to me by candlelight in that cold duplex, I thought she was pulling my leg. She wasn't. Here's what it is. You take your pot of beans, or tough cheap meat, or soup or oats, and you bring it to a hard boil on the stove for just a few minutes. Just a few. Then you take the whole pot, lid on tight, and you bury it in insulation. In the old days, it was a wooden box packed with hay. That's where the name comes from. In my kitchen, it was a cardboard box stuffed with old towels and blankets and crumpled newspaper, with the hot pot nestled deep in the middle and packed all around, top included, so no heat escapes. Then you close it, and you walk away. The trapped heat keeps cooking the food for hours. Slowly, gently, without burning another minute of gas or electricity. You brought it to a boil for 5 minutes. The box does the next 4 or 5 hours for free. You come back to tender beans, cooked through grains, a finished stew, having paid for only a few minutes of fuel instead of hours. During the war, families used this to cook while they were out working, and to save the scarce fuel they weren't allowed to waste. It works exactly as well in your kitchen tonight. Think about what that means for the person with almost nothing. The cheapest foods on earth, dried beans, whole grains, tough cuts, are the ones that need the longest, most expensive cooking. The hay box erases that cost. It turns your gas bill down to a trickle and makes the poorest ingredients into real meals. It was born out of the hardest scarcity this country ever knew, kept alive by people who couldn't afford to forget it, and it has been sitting in an old wartime pamphlet waiting for you the whole time. I packed my first one in a cardboard box lined with 2 old bath towels, and I cooked a pot of beans that fed me for 3 days on 5 minutes of flame. I remember lifting that lid, not quite believing it, and feeling the steam hit my face, and understanding for the first time that I was never going to be truly helpless again. That's the feeling I want to leave in your hands. So here's what tonight really was. It wasn't 30 little hacks. It was the return of something that was quietly taken from people like us, the plain knowledge of how to need less, so that no shrinking check and no rising price can ever leave you as frightened as it used to. You're the kind of person who refuses to be wasteful and refuses to be fooled twice. That's why you watched all the way here while everyone else scrolled past. That instinct in you, the one that says there has to be a better way than spending every last dollar, was right all along. Now do one thing for me. Tell me down in the comments which trick you're going to use first. And tell me this too. Do you already have an old-timer in your life? A grandmother? An aunt? A neighbor? Who taught you one of these before I did? I read every one, and I want to know whose kitchen your knowledge came from. Leave it below. Say where you're watching from, too. And if you want to keep pulling this buried knowledge back out of the ground, stay with me here, because you're not just following a channel, you're joining the people who are quietly learning to never be caught helpless again. Next time, I'm going to show you the forgotten way the old folks kept milk, eggs, and butter fresh for weeks with no refrigerator at all, using nothing but water and a clay pot and a breeze. It kept families fed long before electricity, and once you see it, you'll never look at your kitchen the same way again. Save your grease, mend your seams, pack your box, and I'll see you in the next one. Now this video gave you the overview, but the full walkthrough of every trick, step by step, is waiting inside the Poor Man's Circle. In there you can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself, a real person, not some machine. And you won't be alone. You belong here with folks just like you. Just point your phone's camera at the code on the screen. Cancel anytime. I'm glad you're here.